Remora triggers, Marco holds priority taking a peek at the top card, draws it.
Welcome to SplitSecond. If you want to buy the best sleeves or other magic related accessories, head down to Dragon Shield using the affiliate link below.
If you plan to buy some magic singles for your latest brew, check out TCG Player, where you can find all the niche cards you're missing, and by using our new affiliate link, you're helping the show. This week we received as guests our patron and friend Marco, organizer of Swiss Irregulars monthly cEDH tournaments in Switzerland, and Philip, one of the winners of our last events. Elder brewed his own take on Nadu Winged Wisdom, Marco brought his pet deck, Elsha of the Infinite, Philip is also on his pet and winning deck, Tivit Seller of Secrets, and Bal built a Staxi combo list for Shao Jun. Elder is going first and he mulliganed once, finding a rather interactive 7, Scalding Tarn and Island for lands with a Mox Ember and Utopia Sprawl for ramp. From there, Offer You Can't Refuse, Trickbind and Chain of Vapor will police the board for the early game, while the Shen can also be used as a progressive piece to trigger Nadu. Marco kept his first 7, with the Wooded Foothills and Polluted Delta for lands. Jewel Lotus and Mana Vault will easily assure an early Elsha, while Unwinding Clock can make sure that Vault and other future rocks are untapped on each other opponent's turns. Mystic Remora for card advantage and Chain of Vapor for removal. Philip also mulliganed once and found a hand able to cast Tivit 3 turns earlier, Flooded Strand, Marsh Flats and Minamo for lands, with a Mana Vault and Talisman of Progress for ramp. From there, Chain of Vapor for removal or to be pitched to Misdirection if needed. Lastly, Bal mulliganed to 6 and didn't want to go lower, mostly relying on a land on the top 2 to be paired with the Cascade Bluffs to then cast Power Balance and get card advantage that way. Springless Drum would require a creature or Shao Jun to be out. Curiosity is another great piece of card advantage when enchanted on his commander. Professional Facebreaker helps generating rocks to be tapped for mana, or Shao Jun's ability, and Mystical Tutor can help him pivot his game plan. He sent Haze of Rage to the bottom. Now, before we start, we want to call out all Swiss players and nearby ones to the next Swiss Irregulars event on August 25 in Bern. Come battle your way for a dual land and with a great new tournament structure sponsored by Prowess. If you cannot attend, feel free to check out the Swiss Irregulars YouTube channel for the latest informations, events, streams and much more. Now, ready for the match? Elder starts his turn with his Scalding Tarn, cracking it for a tropical island. He then casts Utopia Sprawl on his drop and passes. Marco plays the Wooded Foothills and cracks it for a volcanic island. He casts Mystic Remora and ends up with a Jewel Lotus, passing to Philip. Conservatively, Philip just plays a Flooded Strand and passes without casting Mana Vault. Bal plays Cascade Bluffs and also passes. Elder plays an island and brings out his commander, Nadu. Not wanting to feed Remora, he passes without casting the Mox Ember. Marco untaps and pays for the Remora. He plays a Polluted Delta and cracks it for a Tundra. He casts Mana Vault and passes. In the end step still, Philip cracks his Strand to fetch for a tapped Hallowed Fountain and get to his turn. He draws, plays a Marsh Flats and passes, holding his rocks in order not to feed the fish. Bal draws and it's unfortunately not a land, so he's forced to pass. Elder gets to his turn, casts a Lotus Cobra and passes, failing a land drop. Marco untaps and does pay for the Remora upkeep, with his Mana Vault. He draws and takes one from the vault, and decides to cast his commander, Elsha of the Infinite, thanks to Jewel Lotus. It resolves, so he takes a peek at the top of his library, proceeding to cast Mox Opal from the top. Elsha triggers and players start to discuss when they should interact. Philip goes ahead, cracking his Marsh Flats, but in response to that, Marco casts from the top of his library a Chrome Mox, triggering Elsha again. In response to this, before Marco gets access to all that mana, Philip fires his Chain of Vapor, targeting Elsha. Remora triggers, Marco holds priority taking a peek at the top card, draws it, and then fires an Enlightened Tutor in response to the Chain of Vapor. Philip passes priority and Elder responds with what he can. An offer you can't refuse. Not the ideal, they know, but probably better than allow Marco to find Sensei's top already, or something as worse. Remora triggers, Marco draws unless the tutor be countered, gaining 2 treasures and access to a new card on top, which is what he was actually looking for. So he casts from the top, now cracking 1 treasure, Sensei's Divining Top. What a stack! And players are trembling for their lives. Marco is also running out of fuel, so he cracks his last treasure to activate the top, rearranging it. Chain of Vapor is now allowed to resolve, bouncing Elsha, and Marco copies it. By sacrificing Autoara and targets his Mana Vault, ending the chain there. Chrome Mox now resolves and Marco imprints Transmute Artifact. And then Philip finally gets to finish his Marsh Flats cracking, finding a tapped Watery Grave. Now Mox Opal resolves and now Marco activates the top to draw a card, putting it on top. And this way he casts the Drawn Soul Ring, followed by his Mana Vault, and finishes with an Unwinding Clock, setting up his artifact Seedborn effect, ending the turn. Philip untaps as well as Marco untaps all his artifacts. Philip draws, plays a Minamo and feels forced to start progressing his game plan, casting his Mana Vault, mentioning out loud his saving for his Force of Will hard cast. Bal draws, but yet no lands. He proceeds to end step and Marco fires a Chain of Vapor on Nadu, triggering it. Elder reveals Bosejo, which is put into play, triggering Lotus Cobra for 1 blue mana. In response to the chain, Elder fires a Snap on his Nadu, triggering Nadu and Remora, but unable to pay. Marco draws and Elder reveals a Windswept Teeth, entering play and triggering Lotus Cobra for another blue. Nadu is snapped back to hand and tapping 2 lands. Chain fizzles and Ball discards a mystical 2-turret cleanup. Elder was mainly looking for fuel, since Marco is slowly running away with his one. He gets to his turn and recasts Nadu Winged Wisdom, proceeds to combat and chips Marco for 2 with his snake, ending his turn. Marco untaps with 9 mana, more than happy to pay for his Remora. He draws and takes 1 from the vault. He plays in Mana Confluence and recasts his commander from hand, Elsha, which hits the table uncontestedly. Since the Divining Top follows, triggering Elsha, and Elder holds Marco for a moment, firing his Force of Negation, pitching Trickpine to it. Remora triggers and Marco holds priority by casting an LED from the top of his library. Elsha triggers, although these Prowess triggers rarely matter, especially if she's summoning sick, or Marco isn't popping off. Marco then draws from the Remora and still responds to the Fawn with a Tormod script on the top, hoping to find interaction, but he bricks. So Sensei's definitely exiled for good, and Marco sadly passes. In the end step though, Philip fires a Baby Rift on Elsha, triggering Remora, and Marco draws, but finds no protection. We're back to Philip. He draws but still no lands, so he goes ahead casting his commander, Tivit, Seller of Secrets. Marco responds to it though, casting an Intuition targeting Baal with it. He finds Underworld Breach, Dress Down, and Savin's Reclamation, hoping Baal would give him the Dress Down, but Baal chooses the Savin's Reclamation so Philip can still be a threat for Marco, and so Philip at least gets 2 treasures to interact. Tivit ends up resolving, and Philip votes for 2 treasures, Baal votes for a treasure as well, Elder proposes to vote for a clue so he could dig for stuff against Marco, and Marco votes treasure as well. Philip then passes. Baal draws and finds a land, but really upset that it's a colorless land, an Urza's Cave. Believing in his next draw step, he casts a Springleaf Drum, triggering Remora and unable to pay, ending his turn. Elder draws, plays a Wooded Foothills, triggering Lotus Cobra for a green mana that he uses to cast Finnorn Elves, and passes with 2 cards in hand. Marco untaps and still pays 4 for the Remora to stick. That Unwinding Clock is doing a lot for Marco. He draws and proceeds to cast Counterbalance, followed by some groans from the table as it resolves. He casts a Mana Crypt and plays Plateau. So, after these reactions from the table, Marco decides to go for it, and casts Savin's Reclamation targeting Underworld Breach. However, it's the 3rd spell, and that means only one thing: a free Mindbreak Trap is cast by Philip, triggering Counterbalance and Remora. He draws and then reveals a Tree Fairy, which is also a strong piece, leaving him needing to find the kitten only. Savin is exiled for good, and Breach is now out of the menu for Marco. He casts a Fellow Stone and follows it with an Imposter Mech, entering play as a copy of Tivit, triggering its ETB. Marco votes for 2 treasures, Philip as well. Baal votes for a clue, since Marco's plan is to recast Elsha and place Tivit, so this way he could draw Tree Fairy in order to find other stuff on top. However, since Elder is packing some interaction for Tivit, he also votes Clue, to prevent Marco from recasting Elsha all along. With his plans a bit foiled, Marco cracks his LED for triple blue, discarding 2 lands, Birgi and Elsha, which he moves to the command zone, and from there he casts her for 7 mana. He does go Hellbend, but he will untap with all his rocks with Philip. In the end step still, Elder fires a Chain of Vapor targeting his Firnor Elves, triggering Counterbalance, Remora and Nadu. Elder holds priority and cracks the Windswept Teeth to find a forest, triggering Lotus Cobra for a blue and folds 4 to pay for the Remora. He then reveals from the top a Breeding Pool that he puts into play tapped, triggering the Cobra for 1 blue, and everyone knows Counterbalance has Tree Fairy on top. So the chain resolves and he decides to copy it, sacrificing a land and targeting Lotus Cobra, triggering Nadu again. He reveals another forest. Quite unfortunate to him. Cobra still triggers for another blue before it is bounced. He chooses to copy it again, sacrificing Bosejo and sending it towards Tivit, triggering Ward, and he pays for it with a floating mana and another land. Tivit is bounced and Philip does the conservative play of copying it, sacrificing Minamo to target Elsha, and Marco sighs as his commander can't stick the board. Philip untaps and so does Marco untaps all his rocks. He draws and takes 1 from the Meta Vault. No lands found, but with all his treasures he recasts his commander, and everyone passes priority. Tivit triggers and he votes 2 treasures, while everyone else votes for clues, as he's now probably the biggest threat. Philip then casts an Esper Sentinel, and now Marco holds priority on the Counterbalance trigger and cracks a clue to draw the Tree Fairy, revealing a Sink into Stupor. Philip passes, and in the end step Marco cracks his last clue to draw the Bounce spell. Baal reaches for the top deck, and still no lands, so he just passes, deeply considering his life choices. Well, more like his land choices. Elder draws, recasts his Finnorn Elves, triggering Counterbalance, but Marco passes on it. And then Elder recasts his Lotus Cobra, triggering Counterbalance once again, but now Marco acknowledges the trigger, revealing a Blind Obedience, effectively countering the snake, so Elder sadly passes. In the end step still, Marco casts his Sink into Stupor, targeting Tivit, triggering its ward and Esper as well, and Marco pays for everything. In response, Philip fires his Misdirection, triggering Counterbalance and Remora. Marco draws and then reveals a Gitaxian Probe, so Misdirection resolves and it changes the target to Finnorn Elves, so Nadu can trigger and maybe allow Elder to find something. However, it's another land, a Flooded Strand, quite on theme as Elder did flood a lot. Marco now gets to his turn. He keeps paying 5 mana for his Remora to stay. He takes no damage from the crypt and then takes 1 from the vault after drawing. He recasts Elsha for the quintillionth time this match. It resolves and he taps her to crew Imposter Mech and swings 6 in the air against Philip, who doesn't block, as he can't afford to lose Tivit with just 3 mana sources. Marco's Imposter Tivit connects and triggers, so he votes 2 clues and everyone else votes treasures. In his second main phase, he proceeds to cast Blind Obedience, triggering Sentinel and he pays. Everyone else knows that this is the last combo outlet, but it ends up resolving. Then Marco follows it with a Gitaxian Probe, looking at the 2 cards on Philip's hand and drawing a card before passing. Philip draws and takes 1 from the vault. He plays an Arin Mesa and jumps to combat, sending Tivit towards Baal just to make sure it connects and triggers. He votes 2 treasures and so does everyone, but they all enter tapped due to Blind Obedience. On his second main phase, Philip crafts his Arin Mesa and Marco responds by casting a big Shatterskull smashing X = 6, which then becomes doubled, and therefore he divides 6 damage towards Tivit and 6 towards Nadu. As per Sentinel, Tivit's ward and Nadu all trigger, and he does pay for Philip's triggers. Nadu reveals a volatile Storm Drake, and Philip cracks a clue to draw a card, but finds no answers. Tivit is once again out of play, and Philip finds himself a Tundra before passing. Baal draws and slams a Lotus Petal, only to cry about Blind Obedience. Remora and Sentinel both trigger and he pays for none, ending his turn. In the end step, Elder goes ahead cracking his fetch lands, one at a time, Wooded Foothills for a Dryad Arbor and Flooded Strand for an Edge Maze, really hoping to stop drawing more lands. He surveils an Elvish Spirit Guide to the yard, which is somewhat of a land, and proceeds to his turn. Elder draws and medley reveals yet another land, a Prismatic Vista. He recasts Nadu, which resolves uncontestedly, and then slams the volatile Storm Drake, which now Marco holds priority on the Counterbalance trigger, and cracks 1 clue to draw the card. Since he can pick at the top card through Elsha, he cracks another clue to draw the top card, looking deeper, but finds nothing to counter Storm Drake, so it enters play, providing 4 energy to Elder, and he exchanges control over Elsha. But since he can't pay 5 energy, Elsha just dies. Elder still goes ahead cracking the Prismatic Vista for a forest, to recast Finnorn Elves before passing. Marco untaps and yet again pays 6 mana for Mystic's Remora cumulative upkeep. He is safe from the crypt and draws, taking 1 from the vault. He plays an untapped Steam Vents, paying 2 life, and casts a Dockside Extortionist, extorting everyone through Blind Obedience. Dockside enters play and he creates 14 treasures. He then crews Imposter Tivit with the Storm Drake and attacks Philip for 6 damage, triggering and voting, 2 clues from him and 3 treasures from everyone else. He then casts Elsha for 9 and still extorting everyone else. He is now able to future side, so he cracks a clue to draw. He then casts a Mox Diamond from the top of his library, triggering Esper Sentinel and paying for it, as well as extorting. He discards a Hallowed Fountain. He found a tutor, so he goes ahead casting Tree Fairy, once again extorting. As players pass priority, Elder fires his last bullet, a Pact of Negation, triggering Counterbalance, Remora and Sentinel, and he can't pay for any. However, Marco responds with a Fierce Guardianship, and this seems to be it. Teferi Time Reveler enters play and Marco downticks it, bouncing Dockside back to his hand, and drawing a card. He then recasts Dockside Extortionist, extorting everyone and creating another 14 treasures on ETB. He follows that with an Ancestral Knowledge, also extorted, and this somewhat dig through time digs him 10 cards deep, allowing him to exile a couple of lands and finding the last piece of the puzzle. He cracks his last clue to draw a card and slam the Displacer Kitten into play, also extorted. From there, he casts Thought Lash, also extorting and triggering the Kitten to blink Tree Fairy, which from there allows him to bounce Mox Opal and recast it indefinitely, triggering the Kitten to blink Tree Fairy, which bounces it back to hand and draws a card. This allows him to extort each cast of Mox Opal while also digging through his deck for any alternative line that could be needed. GG. Thank you for joining us for today's match, everyone. If you would like to play with us in our matches, check out our Patreon below. Speaking of which, we'd like to start the credits by thanking our current patrons, and especially Izanagi, Ajimo, Drunken Housecat, Pina, Ricardo, Katerina, Zenon, Chris and Travis, our stack breakers. If you want to support us, you can do so by liking this video, subscribing or by becoming a patron yourself. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and a comment below, it greatly helps the channel. You can also take a look at one of these videos here.